Wayne is at a funeral, I assume in Altamont. I'm not sure. Jenna says yes. I can't remember. What was the name of the man who passed away? Oh, the preacher over there. And for the life of me, I can't remember his name. That's sad. But anyway, he is over there at the funeral and will be late getting back. He asked me to cover him in the class, so I will attempt to do the best that I can. That's all I can say. Wayne introduced the book last week, and essentially he's got a little introduction here for chapters 1 and 2. This is the first couple of chapters, actually, I guess you'd say the first 3 or 4 chapters here, really. Well, the first 2 chapters are the end of David's life, I guess, is how you would term those. And then the next couple of chapters, the beginning of Solomon's actual reign after David passes away. Some interesting things happen during this time. As some people say that history is not a line. History is actually a circle. It keeps on repeating itself over and over and over. And to some extent, that's true. Somebody took... I'm not going to get into that. That has nothing to do with the lesson. I'm not going to get into that. When we have too much time and nothing to do with it. But at any rate, some have said that these 2 chapters really should be the epilogue to Samuel rather than Kings. Now, in the Jewish Bible, they have fewer books in their Old Testament. One of the reasons for that is they do not have a 1st and 2nd Samuel. They have Samuel. And they do not have 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. They have Kings and they have Chronicles. Now, it's the same text. They just simply divide it up differently. For some reason, the English Bible, I guess they just thought these books were too big, and so they split them up, some of them into 2 books. And the Jewish mind, they just don't do that. So, whether these were... We don't really know who it was who wrote Kings, for sure. I think Wayne went into that a little bit on Sunday. So I'm not going to deal with all of that. But at any rate, certainly the first 2 chapters of 1 Kings transitions us from the story that was begun in Samuel into what is continued in the Kings. We see in verses 1 through 4 that David was a very old man. And I hope you read the text at home, and I'm not going to read it with you tonight, because I think we all should have read it at home. But David is an old man, advanced in age, and he can't keep warm. And so the idea of the physicians is that they're going to go out in all of the kingdom, and they're going to find the most beautiful girl that they can, and she's going to minister to David and keep him warm. Okay, I know this is going to get me in trouble with Ruth when she hears. But can a beautiful girl keep a man warm better than an ugly girl? I just don't know. Does that make any sense to you? He's not going to know her. He's not going to have intimate relations with her. She is a nursemaid to him, and she is getting under the covers with him simply to keep his body heat up. But they had to find a beautiful girl, and they searched through the whole kingdom to find her. Some things about this just don't make a bit of sense to me. And he had all of these other wives, and many of them were younger than him. They could have done the same thing. Kept him warm. Go ahead, Jenna. Are you going to save me or throw me in deeper?
I'm hoping I'm going to.
Okay. Go ahead.
My first thought was, how long did that search possibly take if David stayed cold like that?
I don't know. So they searched for a beautiful girl throughout all the territory of Israel, and they found Abishag the Shunammite.
And then it also made me think of the hunt for
Yeah. Yeah, actually, you know, the hunt for Esther probably took longer. I mean, all of the beautiful girls in the kingdom were brought up before Ahasuerus. We don't know how many were in that harem, but, you know, they had to go through a beautification period and all of that, and then they each went in to the king for a night. Well, anyway, decided whether he wanted to keep them or not, and they were sent to the harem. If he didn't like them, well, they remained there celibate for the rest of their days. And being in the king's harem, my understanding was not really very fun. I mean, you were taken care of, you were fed well, and you had a lot of things that you could play around with, but you couldn't go outside. You couldn't meet other people. You had to stay there in that compound, taken care of by the king's eunuchs and that sort of thing. So, I don't know, that wouldn't appeal to me if I was a woman. But I guess they didn't have much choice about it. Anyway, in verse 5, it says, Adonijah, and let's just read down through verse 10. Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. So he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen with 50 men to run before him. His father had never crossed him at any time by asking, Why have you done so? And he was also a very handsome man, and he was born after Absalom. He had conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and Abiathar the priest. And following Adonijah, they helped him. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Ray, and the mighty men who belonged to David were not with Adonijah. Adonijah sacrificed sheep and oxen and fatlings by the stone of Zeholeth, which is beside En Rogel, and he invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the men of Judah, the king's servants. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, the mighty men, and Solomon his brother. Now, just from reading what's here, what would you say was wrong with what Adonijah did? What's that? Okay, well that's one thing. Keith, I think you, Jenna, okay, and then Keith. When has David ever said Solomon shall be king? Go ahead, Keith. He's pulling the next question. Thank you. You got there ahead of me. Good. Jenna?
Well, I mean, I guess even if something about Solomon.
Well, I think that's quite obvious. Now, whether this was announced formally, Solomon shall be king after me, or not, it was to some extent known, because this guy Adonijah didn't invite the key people that he should have invited if he was going to be the next king, and his brother Solomon. So he knew something. I mean, I think there's guilt there. Was he? Well, what about Chileab? Chileab was number 3. No, excuse me. Chileab was number 2. Adonijah was 1, Chileab, and then Absalom was number 3. And then Adonijah. We don't know what happened to Chileab. I guess that's how you pronounce it. I don't know. We have no idea what happened to him, because after it says that he was born to David, it never mentions him again. He may have still been alive. But if he was, you know, he was low key. So, and then really, you know, when you look at it, there were 2 others after Adonijah before Solomon was born, too. So Solomon, we don't know if they were still alive or not. We don't know. There's nothing much is said about them either, if anything. So Solomon was on down the way here, but God told David Solomon would be his heir, and God just doesn't do things the way we always do them. Yeah, Bathsheba knew. So this was revealed to somebody that Solomon was to be David's successor. And Adonijah, it says specifically in the text, vaunted himself or exalted himself. Depends on which version you've got. He took this upon himself. Now, let's go back a little bit to his father David. When Samuel came and God said, you go down to the house of Jesse and I'm going to show you which of his boys is going to replace Saul. Was David up there? Me, me, me. He was out in the field tending the sheep. And it wasn't until all the other sons had been run through and God said, that's not the one, that Samuel turned to Jesse and said, do you have any more sons? Well, yeah, I've got David out here tending the sheep. Now, I don't know if David knew Samuel was coming or not. It doesn't say, so we can't speculate on that. But when David was anointed as king, did he take it upon himself to be king? No. He said, Saul is God's anointed, and I'm going to be subject to Saul until his death. So we see a big difference in attitudes here between David and two of his sons anyway. Keith, you had something?
Absolutely. Discipline. You had discipline.
You know, that's a question that I have about this, because looking at verses 11 and on, I'm not sure if David knew what was going on or not. Well, Absalom, he did know. Okay? I mean, it's obvious he knew with Absalom. But with Adonijah, from what is said here from this point on, I'm not certain that he knew what Adonijah was doing. At least not at this point in time. But now, does a father know his sons? Or should a father know his sons? Yeah. Go ahead and read that.
Father had not. Did he say?
So it indicates there that David at least had some idea of Adonijah's leanings, whether he knew what Adonijah was going to do with him or not. He apparently knew his son was at least an arrogant son. Go ahead, Jenna.
Running around with the chariot, he doesn't find out about the party until
Yeah. Whether David, I think probably the answer to this, and I'm just saying probably, is that David knew of Adonijah's leanings, but he didn't know that Adonijah had actually gone and done it, so to speak. But now, Nathan, seeing what's going on, has to go tell the king, you got to do something about Adonijah. Jesus said, be wise as serpents, but what else? Harmless as doves. Most of us have the harmless as doves part down, but we don't have the wise as serpents part down. We need to know how evil people act, and we need to know how the devil acts so that we can defend against him. Do you think Nathan was a guy who had that down, of being wise as a serpent but harmless as a dove? God told him, you go and you convict David of murder and adultery. Now here's an absolute despot. That's what a king is. Well, today a king is more of a figurehead in a lot of countries. England, the queen is just a figurehead. But when she was actually queen, or when her grandfather, I guess, was in reality the head of the English government, he could say, off with her head. And the soldier just reached out and whack, and it was done. Story is told of Nero that he had a nephew that had a bad cough. And this was just a little boy. And that cough bothered Nero. And so Nero ordered one of his guard to just go and execute that boy. And the guard brought the boy's head right to Nero. And he said, now I'm free of that. You know, and of course the child was probably better off dying in infancy like that, or at a very young age, than growing up in that kind of a household. But that's God's end of the stick, not mine. But that's the way a king could act. So here's Nathan. He's got to go tell David, you've committed adultery and then you committed murder to cover it up. You think David's going to take that very well? I doubt it. And so he tells him the story of the man that had the one ewe lamb and the man that had his neighbor that had plenty of sheep and stole the one ewe lamb to serve it to his neighbor. And David was incensed. And David pronounced the punishment upon himself, that man shall die the death, and he shall repay, was it fourfold, for what he's done? Well, David couldn't very well repay fourfold for what he had done to Uriah the Hittite, because Uriah wasn't alive to receive it. But here we have David again. Now, Nathan, knowing that David let Absalom get away with what he got away with and didn't restrain Absalom, and how he acted when Absalom was finally killed and all of this, he's got to understand, he's got to know that David is going to be the same way with Adonijah and go, oh, what am I going to do? You know, I can't rebuke my son. David had a very soft spot in his heart for his children that cost him dearly. And I've seen a lot of parents that have a very soft spot in their heart for their children and cost them dearly. You know, my child can't do any wrong. We've all been in restaurants with parents that wouldn't discipline their children, and I've actually seen children come up to other people's plates and take food off of them, and their parents wouldn't discipline them. And the restaurant manager had to go and ask them to leave. And the parents got very offended that anybody would be offended at my child because they're perfect. Well, this apparently was kind of the way David, at least to some extent, saw his own children. So Nathan devises a plan, and he goes to Bathsheba, and he says, now you go in and you talk to the king and you tell him what Adonijah's doing and what's going on. You just, you know, like, didn't you say Solomon was going to be on the throne, David? Kind of innocently. And then while you're speaking to him, I will come in like I didn't know you were there, and I'll verify your story. Now, does a second opinion matter? A lot of air conditioning companies out there will put two men in a truck, because a lot of times when the tech is out there and he says, you need a new air conditioner, the customer goes, I don't know about that. And then they want a second opinion. And so if they put two men in the truck, it's rigged. I mean, they know they got this scripted out. I worked for a company like this one time. I didn't do this. I was there 3 months. That's as long as I could hold out. But anyway, until I found something better. You know, the first guy comes up and gets the homeowner, look at this, you need a new air conditioner. And while the homeowner's saying, well, I don't know about that, the second guy comes up and goes, oh man, you need to replace that thing. And hearing it twice, a lot of times they make the sale. And that's the way they do it. And so this is kind of what Nathan does to David, except in this case, Nathan is not lying. He's harmless as a dove. He's trying to get the truth through to David, but he understands that if David only hears it one time from Nathan, David might say, well, you're just jealous because you didn't get invited to the party. But when Bathsheba says it, and then Nathan comes in after her and confirms the story, now you've got a second opinion, as it were, and David's much more likely to accept it. And so David does. David still doesn't chastise Adonijah. But he says to Nathan, you take Adonijah and Zadok the priest and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and you take them out and you crown Solomon as king in my stead. Now, that means that Solomon and David reigned as co-regents for a certain amount of time before David died. We don't know how long that was. This was common in those days for co-regents to reign. But what it did, Adonijah was not going to go up against his father. But Adonijah was willing to go up against Solomon. If David had said, you crown Solomon and then he will become king after I'm dead, there still could have been a fight between the two sons over who was going to be king. So David set this up correctly and said, Solomon is going to reign while I'm still alive so he can establish his kingdom, and Adonijah can't break it. And so that's what they do. And they anoint Solomon as the king of Israel. And then Zadok, well, let's see. They anoint him as king. The next few verses, was there anything there that... I'm kind of losing my place. I'm sorry. The sun has been baking my brain all day, so all week, so I'm kind of... Let's do that. Read verse 28 down through 37. Somebody.
Then David answered and said, call Bathsheba to me. She came into the king's presence and stood before the king and said, the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from every distress. Listen, I swore to you by the Lord God of Israel, saying, surely shall be king me. Still my throne in my place. Certainly. Then Bathsheba bowed and raised her face to the earth, and home to the king and said, let my Lord, the king live forever. And he said, call to me Zadok the priest, the prophet, and his son Jehoiada. He came before the king, take with you the service of the Lord, and have Solomon my son ride on my own mule, take him down, die hungry. There let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king of Israel, blow the horn and say, long live Solomon. Then you shall come after him, you shall sit on my place. Over Israel. And the son of said, amen. Lord, God of my Lord, King, Lord has been Lord the King. He will so make you Solomon his throne greater than the throne of the Lord.
Okay. He says this to Bathsheba first. Now, if David had not anointed Solomon as king, what do you think would have happened to Solomon and Bathsheba after David's death if Adonijah had consolidated his power? Probably would have killed him, because that's what you did. You know, you don't let your rivals live back then. And so David is making sure here that everything is going to go smoothly and this transition is going to happen the way it's been foretold by God. And something that was interesting to me, and I'd forgotten this, I'm glad we read that again because it brought it back to mind. Look at verse 35. For I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and Judah. It seems that even in the time of David, there was already a little bit of a rift forming, maybe. I don't know how far to take this. I just noticed that as I was reading through it the other night and thought, That's worthy of mention. Just don't know what it exactly means. You remember there for a time when David became king, some of the tribes didn't want to accept him. Some of the tribes wanted to accept one of Saul's remaining relatives. And the southern tribes tended to go with David, and the northern tribes tended to go with Saul's son, Saul's heir, so to speak, until that ended badly for Saul's heir. So it could be that this rift has been forming for a long time, and we don't really read about it until after Solomon died that it, blew apart. Why would the Benaiah tell David, "May the Lord make Solomon's throne greater than the throne of my Lord King David"? Do you think that would kind of maybe hurt David's ego? Think back, for what I'm getting at, I didn't word that very well. Think back to King Saul. And they said, Saul has slain his what? Thousands. And David has slain his 10,000s. Did that make Saul angry? Yeah, it did. When you tell, well, may he make his throne greater than yours, that essentially is the same thing. But this was David's son, whom he had appointed as king. And David, being the good shepherd of Israel, only really wanted the best thing for the kingdom. So this was not a threatening thing to say. Just total different attitude in the two men. Let's see. Why would Joab, do you think, go after Adonijah? Joab, David's faithful army commander. All the years of David. When Adonijah sets himself up as king, it is one of the things I've wondered about is if it was generally known by most of the people that Solomon was going to be David's successor, why would Joab take up with Adonijah? It seems to me like he would think, he would realize that he was going up against David when he did that. That wouldn't end well for him. Go ahead. It's possible. We don't know. I think that this is perhaps an indicator that maybe not everyone realized that Solomon was to succeed David until it was actually announced. But I don't know the answer to that question. I really don't. I think there's evidence one way and there's evidence the other way, and we just have to kind of leave it where it is. The story happened the way it happened. And so they anoint Solomon, and when Adonijah is in there and he hears all the commotion going on out there in the city, what does Adonijah do? Yeah, he doesn't understand this. And so now in verse 42, while he was still speaking, behold, Jonathan the son of Abiathar the priest came in, and Adonijah said, "Come in, for you are a valiant man and bring good news." Why would a valiant man always bring good news? Why would he say something like this? It was, yeah. Yeah, it's like when you kill the pig, it's good news because we're going to have bacon tonight, but for the pig it's not good news. Yeah, I think that Keith hit it right. I think it's wishful thinking. They talked funny, I should say. When David went to, when the plague was coming upon Israel, and David went to the threshing floor of Araunah and offered to buy it from Araunah, and Araunah said, "I'll give it to you." I don't know that was really Araunah saying, "I'm going to give it to you," as much as it was a negotiation. Because the way they will negotiate price over there, they barter everything. And the way they'll negotiate price is, I want that shawl from you. How much do you want for it? And the other man will say, oh, I give it to you. That's not meaning I'm going to give it to you. Us Western people, well, thank you very much. We tuck it under our arm and leave. And we'd probably get shot in the back leaving. Because that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, I'm not going first. You're going first. And that's just the way they barter. And so they talk a little bit around a subject here in a lot of ways. And so I think that Adonijah is just saying, this is his way of saying, I hope you're bringing good news for me. That's the way I take that. He says, no. Our Lord King David has made Solomon king. So now what does Adonijah do? Well, first off, what do all the people around him do? Yeah. Have you ever seen fair weather, friends? Man, it cleared that place out fast. About like somebody yelling fire, I guess. They left. We don't want nothing to do with this guy. And Adonijah, then what does he do next? Okay. Why would he take hold of the horns of the altar? What was special about that? If we look back in Exodus 27 and Exodus 30, it gives instructions on the building of the altar, and they were to have 4 horns in the corners. When the priest offered the sacrifice of atonement on the altar, he would take some of the blood and put it on each of the 4 horns as he made the sacrifice. And so the altar was a place of atonement, not a place of punishment. So by going and taking hold of the horns of the altar, Adonijah was in essence saying, you're going to create an affront to God if you kill me here. You can't do it. Somebody else tried to do that. Who was that? About 2 chapters over. Joab. What happened to Joab? This was after the death of David, and Solomon was king. And they come to Solomon. He's took hold of the horns of the altar. What do we do now? And Solomon said, what? You kill him right there. Go get him. Has nothing to do with the altar. It has to do with justice. Solomon understood that the Ark of the Covenant wasn't sacred. The altar wasn't sacred. It was God that was sacred. And it was only God's presence through His Word that made those items sacred. And so when an evil man tried to misuse those items to save his skin, Solomon wasn't going to have anything to do with that. He said, kill him where he stands. Get rid of him. But Adonijah at this time says, I don't want to die. I'm hanging on here. So Solomon tells me what he's going to do. Let King Solomon, in verse 51, swear to me today that he will not put his servant to death with the sword. And what does Solomon answer him? Verse 52. Okay. I'm going to let Wayne handle that next week in chapter 2, what the end of that is. That Solomon essentially says he's going to bring his own judgment upon himself. He makes the decision, not me. I think that was the beginning of wisdom on the part of Solomon to make that statement that way. I think he was already a pretty wise young man before God gave him His exceeding great wisdom. And I think this shows it to him. Adonijah is going to judge himself, and we're going to let it stand or fall the way it is. So that's the end of chapter 1. If you take, Let me just make a suggestion to you. There are 21 chapters to this 22 to 1 Kings. If you will take like 4 chapters every day, that'll take you about 15 minutes to read that, and read 4 chapters a day, you can read through this book very easily in a week. And if you do that every week of this quarter, by the end of this quarter, you'll know that book better than Wayne does. You will.
That's a challenge.
You will. That's a challenge. So I want to challenge everybody, including myself, to do that this quarter. Thank you.